Yeah, I'm actually a modeling expert. I think I have one entire commit to CBMC.
Wow.
I'm an expert.
Nice. That's cool, man. You've got infinitely more commits to CBMC than I do. Maybe there's a reason.
Is it modeling properties? So is the properties of models, or is this models of properties?
It's actually models of properties. It's modeling in the informal sense, and it probably
So
is
it's modeling of properties,
modeling of properties.
of property modeling.
And I think it's probably with one L. Like now that I see it on the book.
No, I don't know if it's which one of this.
I think it's both. It depends on.
There's a difference between having one.
I think it might be American versus British, but I don't know.
So
You can say it's the Dutch spelling. And only this guy can. Well, I guess we have a contingent. From the Netherlands.
I'm sure Jesse knows more Dutch than I do.
Yeah, Jesse knows everything.
Ha!
But
Yeah, sure.
Dutch.
For sure, definitely, for sure.
I mean, there are people from this in general, not in the UK.
Wow, you contain such nuggets of wisdom. The Greek people exist.
I should have specified.
They'll never exist.
It's okay, you got the better room though. Apparently that room's really warm.
It's also smaller. It's well there. But it, yeah.
How's it that?
Does seem to be the size of the audience. Okay. Oh, that looks weird. Can I make it big here? Just like this one?
You go full screen.
Just F11? No, that would be too easy. How do I go full screen?
Double click it or go to view on the top.
You should be watching your screen.
There we go.
Full screen? Is that?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yay.
Oh, it's always like that. No, but then the stuff at the bottom, oh, it's gone.
Nice. Oh yeah, I guess I probably could have just swapped that down. Well, anyway, here we are now. Okay, so in the previous two sessions, we've seen LTLs, LTSs, so label transition systems, how to describe them, how to build them, how to model them, but we haven't been able to talk about them at all in meaningful ways. We want to verify properties of them, so we want to have a way of talking about the properties of the systems, of the protocols that we want to verify. So this is what this lecture is going to be about. It's going to be about models. And I haven't turned this on. Great. So what is a model? Why do we call this model checking? You have to excuse me that I had to indulge in that joke. We don't mean that kind of model. No, not fashion. It's a different type of model. And I wanted to give a reason why we call this model checking, why we call this models. I'm going to give one slide description of model theory. So model theory is a way of trying to reason about different mathematical theories, like the theory of groups, the theory of rings, of fields, etc. So it tries to generalize what we can talk about it and separate in some sense syntax and semantics. And the idea there is that we want to describe the theory in some formal sense by formulas in a given logic. So a lot of equalities, right? But maybe we'll have some first order formulas, etc., like some symbols specific to the theory, etc. And we want to specify the theory with some formulas, and then be able to reason about what the implications are of this formal way of talking about that. And the key concept there is this models relation, which we write with this. I don't know, I pronounce that models. So A models phi just says that this formula that we've, like this formula in this given logic, holds in the structure A, right? So that's the key. That's one of the key definitions of model theory. That's what gives it the name, and that's why we call this model. And just like Ohad was asking at the beginning, so we're actually going to be talking about properties of the models. So the models are the LTS in this case, and the formulas are going to be in a logic that lets us talk about, in this case, these linear time properties that we care about. So what's the logic that we're going to use? We're going to use a flavor of model logic. And I'm going to give just also, forgive me all those who already know this, just to make sure everybody's on board, a few basics of the different types of logics we could have to express these things. So we know propositional logic, that's the most basic one we've been dealing with, where you have propositions and you have these logical connectives, or, and, negation, but no quantifiers. And if we add quantifiers, we get first order logic. And in model logic, we have two additional symbols usually. So it can be, well, there's different flavors of model logic, but we have two symbols, the box and the triangle. And this box, depending on the type of logic, it kind of expresses some sort of necessity. Something has to be true, something has to hold. And the diamond expresses some sort of possibility, something can be. And we're going to interpret these for label transition systems, but just in general, there's a lot more different logics, model logics, that use these two symbols. So before describing the logic, the formal logic that we use to talk about these properties, we want to describe the properties themselves. And so we're going to define linear time properties, which is the kind of properties of the system that we can talk about today in this lecture. And so if we have a transition system TS, then we define a linear time, sorry, I forgot the time here, a linear time property just as a set of traces. And so the sequences over the power set of the atomic, God, sorry, this should be the power set. Sequences over the power set of atomic propositions. So if you remember, we had these traces which were telling us what holds in every state. So these traces are supposed to be the propositions, the linear time properties that we care about. And the idea is that when we say a proposition is just a subset of this power set, sorry, again here, is a subset of this power set, then we're just saying these are the admissible propositions, so like the admissible traces. So the property being the set means all the ones that, so I'll just define it properly. So if I have a transition system TS and P is a linear time property, so a subset of the power set of sequences over the power set of atomic propositions, then I say that the transition system satisfies P, the set, and we write this using this models relation. If the set of traces of the transition system is a subset of the set P, which is the property. And it's important to note that this is a subset here. So if we have something in the property that's a trace that could never be produced by the transition system, that doesn't really matter, it would still hold, right? Because it's still admissible, right? We're excluding instead of including in this definition. Okay, so now we're going to define a logic to talk about these types of properties. We're going to talk about linear temporal logic, and I want to first motivate this more intuitively. So the core idea of temporal logic, like syntactically, is that we're going to have the same connectors as propositional logic, the model operators, and we have these two additional operators, circle and u, or next, so next and until, and these additional, so the propositional fragment, we know what it means, right? So P and Q are atomic propositions. That's why we're calling the set atomic proposition all the time. But then we have these modalities that we had before. And if you remember, I said square is some sort of necessity. So this necessity we'll call always in temporal logic, and we'll see why in a second. Diamond we'll call eventually. The circle we'll pronounce as next, and U is until, right? So these are the connectors that let us talk about the time. That's why it's called temporal logic, the time at which things happen, at which these propositions hold. So importantly, we don't have these quantifiers. It's a fragment of proposition. It's propositional logic plus these model operators. There's no quantifiers. There's a way to add quantifiers to this, but that gives us a different logic and it's different decision procedures, and we're not going to talk about it in this lecture. So what's the intuition of these? Before we define the formal semantics, I want to motivate it and to explain like how these traces should look like. So if I have an atomic proposition P, and I have so I'm starting at some state S, but remember, we're forgetting the states. We're just looking at the atomic propositions that hold. So we're saying the proposition P just means the current state satisfies the atomic proposition P. So basically, P is an element of this value. That's like the way we're thinking. So this proposition holds now. Is this working? I don't know what's happening here. Oh, so apparently my internet, apparently Zoom kicked me out.
This problem in the previous session.
It looks like Eduroam kicked me out. I mean, I can. There's someone here from the organizer team. Are you chair? So I just wondering if I should change and continue, or do we want to make sure I'm back at? It's disconnected me from Eduroam.
Oh yeah, the internet's died. Rip.
Right. So should I just? I mean, I can just tether myself.
Yeah, Oha, didn't you say just like 10 minutes ago? Good thing nothing horrible happened.
That is not here. So it's okay.
Okay, so it seems to be back on. I'll share my screen again. Okay, it looks like we're back on. So yeah, I was talking about the next operator. So if P says something about the status now, next says something about what's going to happen in the next step. And I put these question marks here because it doesn't say anything about the state now or two states from now. It just says something precisely about the next step. That's why it's called next.
Yeah, that again.
Yep, died again.
Doesn't like the next one.
Hello.
Yeah, it does that every time.
Did it die for you as well?
Yeah. Although it seems sporadically to pop in and out. Yeah, it's working at the moment.
Yep. Okay. Wait, yeah. So, okay, the next connector always. Now this has to hold now and the next and so forth forever. Like always, we call it always because it has to always hold, starting immediately. Right. Eventually means doesn't say anything about right now. Doesn't say anything about the future. It just says at some point in the future there exists a state where this holds.
But including the current possible time?
Yeah.
So, okay.
And until means P holds now, holds. So it has to hold all the time until something else Q holds. So P until Q means it doesn't, after Q happens, we don't care. It doesn't have to continue holding. It just has to happen at some point. But until Q happens, P has to happen.
And P could happen 0 times. And then,
P could happen 0 times, yeah, and that's related. Yeah. So, for example, and getting back to the traffic light example that we've been using all this time, if we can have this statement that we want to be safe, so cars and pedestrians can never go at the same time. So we could express this as always not cars can go and pedestrians can go. So we don't want those two to be happening at the same time. So that's the intuition, that's the motivation for linear temporal logic. Now we want to define it formally, and as I said, it's a formal language, so we want to start with the syntax. So this is parameterized by the set of atomic propositions, AP. So if AP is a set of atomic propositions, then we can define an LTL formula over the set AP as a word in the language that's defined by this grammar, and this is, think of this as DBNF. We can say a formula phi is the formula true. A, where A is an atomic proposition, and of the two, the negation of the two. And then notice we're using actually the other two connectors. We're using next of phi and phi1 until phi2. I'm not defining always and eventually, because we can derive these out of the other two. So I'm going to show you how we can derive them in a moment. So we call these formulae, we call them LTL over AP. But if the set of atomic propositions is clear from the context, we just ignore the AP, we omit it, and we call phi an LTL formula. So how do we define the semantics of LTL with regards to transition systems? Sorry? Okay. I think that's the wrong laptop for that. Like that. Yeah.
Sorry.
Cool.
Instructions will pause.
No problem. So we want to define the relation that says a transition system models a formula. So we define the relation, this relation over sequences of over the power set of AP, so the traces, and LTL formula over AP as a relation where all of these hold. So the true always holds. There's no condition, just true holds for in every case. So this should be A, not sigma. Sorry. So all of these sigmas should be an A as a sequence of A1, A0, A1, A2, A3. Sorry. So A models true always for every trace. Now the trace A models A, the little a as an atomic proposition. If A0, remember A0 is an atomic proposition, models A, so that's think of this as A is in AP. A is in A0, because remember these are sets of A0. Maybe I should have written this as A, small a is in A0. So phi 1 and phi 2, it's the same. We're just translating this into the meta logic. So if A models phi 1 and A models phi 2, then it models phi 1 and phi 2. The same for the negation. We just translate this into the meta logic. And here are the two interesting cases: the next operator and the until operator. So the sequence A0, A1, and so forth models next phi if the sequence, this should be an A again, A starting from 1. So remember we define this square brackets to take subsequences. So the subsequent that starts from 1, which is A1, A2, and so forth, models phi. So we're just ignoring what's happening in A0 and going to the next one. And for phi 1 until phi 2, we define this by finding a J. So if there's a J such that so this should be an A again. A starting at J satisfies phi 2. And for all the previous ones, for all the i's less than J, sigma I starting by I satisfies phi 1. Right. So if to answer Jesse's question from before, if J in this case would be 0 and it holds immediately, then this is vacuously true. Question?
Yeah, by A, do you mean capital A or lowercase a, the sequence?
Those should be all capital A. So capital A should be capital A equals A0, A1, A2, and so forth. Yeah, sorry, I don't know where I got the signature. So that's a relation that we can define on traces, right? On infinite sequences of atomic propositions. Now we can also define the semantics for an LTL, and we do this the obvious way. So if phi is an LTL formula over the set of atomic propositions AP, which is the atomic propositions for the transition system, then we define the set of words of phi as, so first we define the set of words of phi. This doesn't have a transition system here. We define the set of words of phi as all the sequences, and now I stopped using the arrow. So on the power set sequences, on the power set of atomic propositions that model this formula so that this relation holds. And now we can define this for a transition system the obvious way with the words. So the transition system TS satisfy formula phi and pi, and we use the same model symbol. If the traces of the transition system, again, here we're using a subset, are a subset of the words of the LTL formula. And it's important again to note that we're using this subset relation because it just means it's again this admissibility thing. So a formula says if a trace is valid, it doesn't tell us which traces have to exist. It just tells us for the traces that exist, are they valid or are they not valid? Okay. Yeah, maybe I'll do this too before asking. So I said we didn't define the always and eventually operators because we can derive them. So I'll just give the derivation of the two. So if we have an LTL formula phi, then we can define eventually as eventually phi is the same as true until phi. So that's kind of clear, right? True will hold for all the states at the beginning, and then at some point phi holds, and after that we don't care. So true until phi is the intuitive notion of eventually. And the always operator we define, so for an LTL formula phi, again we define always with the previous operators, and in this case always of phi is not eventually not phi. So we can try and digest this, what's happening here. So always phi says this has to hold now and in the future. So if we negate this, we're basically using De Morgan to define this, like the duality of that. But intuitively, it means if at some point, so if eventually, like if we forget about this not, eventually not phi means at some point phi will be violated, but will stop, will not hold, then it doesn't hold always, right? So if it doesn't not hold always, then it always holds. So that's LTL, and that's its semantics.
That's
Yes,
the same
of course.
as saying phi until not true.
Is that the same as saying phi until not true?
No, because it has to happen.
Never happens.
Yeah.
Exactly.
No, but
Yeah,
it has to happen.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but it has to happen for us.
Until has to happen.
So that until holds, the second thing
Oh,
has to actually
It
happen at
has
some
to
point.
happen.
Yeah.
Oh,
Otherwise, we couldn't define eventually that way.
Yeah.
Right?
No, that's. Can we do phi until phi?
Phi until I
Or
mean,
was that just?
is phi until phi the same? I should have done
It
equivalent.
happens one or more times.
That's right.
No.
Well, it happens once, or it happens,
Oh, I
it
see.
needs to happen once to satisfy the second half.
Yeah.
It can happen,
Once.
but it's like it satisfies, it's like a prefix of the trace.
It doesn't have to be a thing, just want to be.
Well, I mean, it's kind of underspecified phi. Where do we put
Next.
the things? Right?
Next one.
So
No.
Why not?
oh, sorry, phi is some formula. Phi until phi. Yeah.
But next is just the next single one. Circle is just the next.
Yeah, but it's also.
It could stop holding and then
This is
more
fine.
holding it. Yeah, it would
think
mean
the
it
equivalent
happens
no.
different.
Show me why not.
Phi until phi can have phi happen once,
Yes,
and then question
But that
mark
also satisfies,
twice, and then question mark
That's-
3 times, then question
all of
mark.
these satisfy next phi.
What, you mean this phi?
Yeah, circle phi.
No, circle phi only says that this one happens, and says nothing
Should-
else about anything else.
Should we?
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, I see.
Discuss that one, or-
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, I see.
No, I don't. I mean, it
That's
sounds like a good discussion.
Got it, thanks.
Okay. If you don't want to share the discussion, I'll just continue.
I don't know. is it-
Our,
Okay.
I mean, I'm happy to slow down. I'm gonna finish up the slide
It's phi and
faster
next
than
phi.
I wanted. So
Yeah, we could say that.
yeah,
So what was it? It was,
We get a month.
yeah, what was the original one? Phi until
We
phi.
were, yeah, we were talking about phi, I think this, is it dead? It's not.
You have to
connected.
press it.
Oh, yeah, okay, it's good. Yeah, so phi.
Up.
Test, there we go. Phi until phi says, so because the second half has to happen.
Yeah.
So it's gonna happen at least once.
Yes.
But then phi until phi means every time before the second half of the until happens,
Yes.
phi is going to happen.
Yes.
So then it's going to be phi some finite number of times followed by phi.
Yes.
And so it's, but that's not the same as either box or
But that's-
diamond.
So it means it
It's
will have,
phi, and. Phi and. Let's say, oh, maybe next phi, but
Oh, I,
it's just, it means, I think it's the same as eventually phi.
I think it's
It's one,
just
one,
phi,
or
just phi,
Just phi.
yeah, I believe that, yeah, just phi.
phi until phi.
Phi,
no.
phi is fine.
Phi is
yeah.
equivalent.
No, because phi by itself just says phi happens at time zero.
Which satisfies by phi under phi.
Which is
Yeah, it's
right
satisfied
now.
by, no, but there's an implication, but they're not equivalent to each other.
I think they're equivalent.
They might be equivalent.
What? Until is,
think
until is item code.
Yeah.
Phi until phi means it's not- Yeah. Because phi has to hold right now.
Yeah.
Just do the trace equivalence. Just, you can do the trace equivalence.
I mean, the one implication is obvious, right? So phi implies phi until phi, right? And the other side would be
No, good. Nothing.
phi until phi.
No, it's definitely not item code. There's absorption laws, but it doesn't cancel with itself.
But phi until phi mean there is some point where phi is true and up to that point phi is true always, but then phi is. So but then,
This is absurd.
Yeah, so there's absorption
yeah,
laws.
can we go back to that?
But it's not item code. If you put two phis there, there's no
Yeah.
item code law. So if you look at
I
the.
don't know. I mean, this is-
So from
this is saying
pi
it's
until
true,
phi,
but
we know
it's
that
not true.
phi will
If you look here,
hold at some
right,
point in the
it's a
future
phi
because of the
until
second
phi
part.
is,
Yeah.
But
there's
then
just some time
phi must hold in
where
every state until that one,
that
but then
suffix,
phi
like
holds
that
in that.
Ah.
So like the very first state, which means phi.
It's already,
Yeah,
It's
it's already
already
satisfied.
So
Yeah.
I'm sure phi is
That makes
the
sense.
same.
So I think you're right. I should have prepared some equivalences of,
It's here that.
No, it's more
sigma
fun
zero
this way.
is-
I should have prepared some equivalences of LTO formula. But yeah, that makes sense. I think,
Well, that doesn't.
yeah, it should be,
Yeah.
should be the same. Okay,
So
are you guys
so
happy with
this-
that in the front or?
We'll do it later.
Okay. Yeah, sorry, I'm not trying to interrupt. you. Just, okay, so now we want to use these to model some properties. So we're gonna start by deadlocks again. So if you remember, what is a deadlock? A deadlock is a situation where the system cannot continue to advance. So here's the intuition. We had, if you think about this sender receiver example, we had this sender sent a bunch of messages to that one, and the queue is full, and the queue here is full, and they're all waiting for a response, but they cannot get the response because the queues are full. So the system cannot advance. That's the intuition of a deadlock. What we're trying to model here is that so we want to model this with temporal logic, with linear temporal logic. And basically what we had is an end state, but we've assumed there's no end state. So there's no finite traces, so there's no end states without outgoing transitions. And in essence, the checks that we do to do this transformation where we add this capture state, that's already checking for deadlocks, right? If we check if we check the label transition system and find that we have to add a capture state at some point, we have found a deadlock. So we don't have to redo it. But if we actually do this, it's a simple way of modeling with LTL. So we have no deadlock corresponds to always not in the capture state, right? As soon as we reach a capture state, the one that we introduced, we've reached a deadlock. So if we never reach the deadlock, then we don't deadlock. And formulas of this type of this fashion, they're relatively common when you try to model these kind of properties. So we call these invariants, and it's invariant because there's a property P that doesn't change throughout the entire system. So an invariant is always P, and here P is in the propositional fragment of LTL.
Question?
Oh, Mike.
But that means that we identify the deadlock state manually beforehand,
Yeah.
right?
Absolutely.
So, but if somehow there's an implicit deadlock in the system, we will not be able to specify that.
Well, why not?
Like if there's a deadlock based on given by two states that have no properties that I haven't identified.
Well, then the check we did at the beginning was wrong because we didn't find it.
Yeah. So you have to okay, I think we agree.
So yeah, I agree. Like I think it's from a pragmatic point of view, it's pointless to model the deadlock using that LTL formula because the transformation that we do to find to get the LTS ready for that already ensures that there's no deadlocks, or already checks whether there are deadlocks more precisely. So in practice, also what model checkers do is just they do this transformation by doing a reachability analysis on the state graph, and if there's some state that doesn't have any outgoing transitions, we've already found the deadlock. So we do it well while transforming. But I added this explicitly here just to have a way of saying, okay, we can express this in the logic, but it's a trivial, like pragmatically it makes no sense to first transform it and then check that property. I agree. So here are two other examples of invariant properties that we might care about from the examples we've looked about before, like this mutual exclusion when you have two processes trying in shared memory that are trying to do the same. So maybe we want to say we never have two processes that are at the same time in the critical section. So in the way we model this, we have this crit variable that counts how many processes are in the critical variable. So I can always say crit is always less than 2, like strictly less than 2. So there's never 2 or more processes in the critical section at the same time. And or for example, in the traffic light case, we can this is the formula we said before. Intuitively, you can model this explicitly by saying always cars, either cars cannot go or pedestrians cannot go. I think I had the negation of that. So these are invariants, and invariants are like are a special case of a type of property which we call safety properties. There's other safety properties that maybe, so we might have like something is there's some bad behavior that we want to avoid. Basically, that's the core idea. And an example of a safety property that's not an invariant could be again in the traffic light. So we want to express the meaning of the yellow light. We want to like the point of the yellow light is to warn cars that red is coming. So we don't want red to come suddenly without a warning. How could we express this? We could not express this as an invariant because it's actually to do with how the state changes. And so we could, for example, say it's always the case that if the current state is not, unless the current state is yellow or red, the next state cannot be red, right? So what does this mean? It's a lot of negations here, but basically what we want to have is, so we kind of want to say something never happened, so we could actually move the not to the beginning and negate all of that. So basically, we don't want that at some point. So if we pull this through, I didn't go do the Morgan for that, but if we pull this negation through, it would be eventually. So if at some point we have is that wrong? So if we have, we don't want to have the case that yellow is not followed by red unless red stays in red. That's the idea.
I think it's correct. It's like if it's not yellow or red, then the next step cannot be red.
Right. So the next step can only be read
If it's on
I-
together. or-
if it's after yellow or if it's staying red. Exactly. Yeah. Thanks for the confirmation. confirmation. So we want to define safety properties more generally. So an LT property P, remember this is a subset of the sequences over the atomic propositions AP is a safety property if all the traces in this set of sequences, instead of set of traces, there's a finite prefix pi hat. So it's a finite prefix of pi. That's so pi hat is finite. It's a word, such that all of the extensions of this prefix are not in P, right? So maybe it's easier to read it here. So if we have all the pi primes which extend this pi hat, right? So that pi hat is a prefix of pi star, pi prime. This has to be disjoint from P.
So
Okay.
is
There we go. So is this intuitively saying that a safety property is one that only requires a finite amount of information to know when you've left the property?
When
Okay.
you've
Yeah, okay.
when you messed up. Yeah, exactly. The intuition is
Sorry, can I?
Yeah.
Why do we have to quantify of a pi at all? Why would we not quantify of a pi circumflex? So you could say if there exists a finite prefix such that
well, because we want
is
well, there. I mean, there's no. What do you want to call it? If I remember.
I guess pi just looks a bit like a red herring here, but basically
Well-
telling me it's not.
I mean,
can I Hmm,
you saying why do we? why
I'm
do we
not
have it
sure
like-
if you
why do we have it
could.
I mean, we are quantifying
Why do
of a
we have
pi,
it
right?
there?
So-
Yes. Pi hat. But it's, I mean, I can see it's doing something, but I don't have a good intuition.
So the intuition that I have, but I cannot prove that we could do this without the pi, but the intuition I have, what pi is doing is just saying, oh, if we have an infinite an infinite violating trace, we have also a finite prefix.
But we don't know it's violating. I guess we do know once you know. the
That's
prefix,
what
yes.
we want to
Let's see.
define with that. So it's kind of like, I don't know if it might be possible, but at least I think it's intuitive to define it this way, because what we're saying is any infinite safety property can be classified by a finite prefix.
Sorry, going back.
The derivation of eventually, yeah. Yeah,
Sorry,
Yeah,
no,
but
I-
we
I
can
have-
prove
I don't want to strip this up for that. So here's
so we didn't define eventually, we defined
Atomic proposition.
next and until.
Atomic
I
proposition.
don't know.
Which proposition of one is going to be allocation?
Always. So we defined eventually and always with until and next. Actually, we don't need, we didn't define it with next. So you cannot,
Yeah.
you can also,
I see it.
you could also define a logic with until eventually and always and not next,
This one is
and
not-
that gives you a bit less expressive.
The first,
Ah.
the first place.
I'm just,
Atomic formula.
Do you want the mic, maybe?
So you want the other one? So which one here is not here? This one is here. It's not-
AA question mark refer is not here.
It is, the
AA.
first one is, the first one is A.
Um,
It's just with the until phi
It's
condition
not the other way around, it's just, it's the same case.
is
Oh.
the fact that
Where it's A is a strict.
Which one is here, that's not here?
This one.
box
is
phi,
that
Which one is here, that's not here?
if the until condition isn't met, does that not mean that the until isn't defined properly?
So,
Because there has to be a jai, at which point
Yeah.
the thing.
well, then that means that until doesn't hold. So for until to hold, maybe we can look at this again. So for until to hold, there has to exist this j, so that phi one holds for all prefixes until j,
Fine.
and after j, it doesn't, it
I don't think
sorry,
it's adequate.
it holds for j, and phi two holds for j, and phi one holds for everything before it. So if this never happens, then until is false, right?
I see.
And so that's why we can do always like this, because it means if this until, well, sorry, this one is right, like this has to happen at some point, otherwise the until will not be true. And we don't care about what happens before. Okay. Thanks. So that was safety. Now we want to talk about fairness. Fairness is a different type of properties, but they have an interesting other thing. And we're just going to give intuition for the kind of things that we want to talk about. There's different types of fairness clauses. We just classify them also because sometimes the decision procedures are different. There's unconditional fairness. That's something of the form always eventually P. So what would you can imagine why intuitively this means that something's fair, because everybody gets their turn infinitely often, that kind of thing, right? So P meaning somebody gets their turn. So it's always eventually that. So it'll get it at some point and then it starts again. So there's always going to be infinitely many times. P is going to happen infinitely many times. Then this is unconditional, then these two are conditional. So strong conditional fairness is something of the form always eventually P, like we had before, and that implies some always eventually Q. So like you can think of P as some process asking for their turn. That means they get, if they ask for their turn infinitely often, they also get their turn infinitely often. That's the strong version. And the weak version is just flips these two around. So eventually always P implies always eventually Q. So intuitively think of it this way. So if this P means process, the process is waiting for their turn. So if at some point they start waiting forever, then they'll always also get their turn infinitely often. That's good.
So actually, I have a question about everybody gets their turn. So
Yeah.
so unless you watch the model, you can't really talk about the past, right? So you can't say for every point there was some point earlier that someone has run, right? So you have to somehow keep a state of everyone running, and then you have to reset. Yeah, so the model gets a bit icky.
Yeah, no, you're not talking about, no, you're not talking about.
I'm talking about how to formalize everyone has got their turn in a specific period of time, right? Because you can't really,
So this P would be like,
Yeah. because the action is just I'm running now, right? But I want to say, Andrés ran first. And,
yeah, okay. So you're right. This is, so there is a point that I will make also in a second, but you're right that this everybody is a bit confusing in this case. So we could do this for an individual process. You could say this individual process will always get their turn, and we could do this for every process, right? And that would mean, so if I say this, and so process one infinite gets its turn infinitely often, and process two gets its turn infinitely often, I could say they all get their turn infinitely often. But a lot of the times these fairness properties are not properties that we're checking, but they're assumptions that we're making. So a lot of the time is like we can have something that formally doesn't hold because there's an infinite trace where, like, so think of a traffic light and then think of the example where you have red like all the time for the pedestrians and for the
UK.
cars. Yeah, the UK traffic light. So that should not happen, and maybe you want to avoid that. And so you can say, if we assume this fairness condition, then this proposition holds. That's the general use. So this is generally more thought of as an assumption that we want to use to check under these fairness conditions, then this proposition holds. So this is what I meant by this. So condition or constraint, like this is kind of like a constraint that we want to have to deal with the non-determinism, like have some assumptions about the non-determinism, because the non-determinism is just saying I don't know anything, anything could happen. And there are some unrealistic cases where the non-determinism always decides on the same option.
I don't get why the balancing has like and unconditional and strong and weak.
Yeah, okay, so thanks. I forgot to mention that one. So that's just saying a fairness property is just a property that's got this form. So in general, we say a fairness property is a property that's an unconditional fairness property and a strong fairness property and a weak fairness property. That's kind of like a decomposition of that.
Don't they like? Oh, I suppose one is just weaker than the other.
Yeah.
But then can't you just say unconditional?
No, I mean, unconditional is the strongest. So you could,
Oh, so
So wait, do none of the three unconditional, strong, and weak, are they all not comparable?
no, I think there is an implication chain. I
Okay.
think, so
Yeah, so then why are we conjuncting them together if unconditional applies strong and weak? Then it just is the same as unconditional, right?
so, well, because in this case, it's a good question. I'm not claiming anything. So I'm not making any concrete claim about this being a unique decomposition or something like that. It's
Okay.
just, I'm just saying, in general, you think about a fairness condition as being the three of them. You can probably express them using just unconditional ones. But yeah,
I'm a bit confused about the weak one, because for me it reads like eventually always P is the precondition, right? So if P is waiting, it seems like eventually someone will wait forever. This implies the Q part.
so if someone always eventually starts waiting forever, then they'll also eventually get their turn.
They're waiting forever, so how can they?
Okay, I see what you're saying. Yeah, maybe the analogy breaks there a little bit, like they've asked for their turn.
Point.
So some way that I think of it sometimes, and I don't know if this directly applies, but how I think of it in communication systems is that weak fairness here refers to a communication action will eventually happen, but you have no guarantee that it's going to happen in a finite number of steps. So you can show it will happen, but maybe in an infinite number of steps. That's different from saying that it can never happen, right? But then the strong fairness will say that, oh, it will happen, and there exists a finite number of steps in which that communication will happen. I don't know, is this, am I saying gibberish, or is this?
I'm not sure. I have to admit, I've never written a weak fairness condition, so I don't. I mean, I I'm not sure if what you're saying is a valid intuition. I don't have a good intuition for that. For now, you can take the as face value a weak fairness condition is just defined like that. And I'll get back to you tomorrow about the intuition of that, because I'm also a bit stumped. I don't know. So finally, we come to this other type of properties, which I call liveness property. So, or we call liveness property. So we said safety is something bad will not happen. Liveness is the opposite. It's kind of like good things will happen infinitely often, right? That's the kind of the intuition of the kind of things that we want to make sure. So for example, like you could make a perfectly safe traffic light by just having red the whole time, but that's not a very useful traffic light. So you want to have these kind of liveness conditions you want to have this back and forth between safety and liveness, right? And so, for example, we maybe want to say the traffic light will always eventually get green, right? The pedestrian will always eventually be able to cross the street, even though it takes a very long time. Or the mutex is kind of useful, like it will not gonna block some process the whole time. You can think of it this way, like a mutex always will eventually lets the process enter its critical section. So there's different ways of defining liveness. Like this is maybe a bit less standard, but this is one definition by Alpern and Schneider. And we're gonna use this definition because it gives us a nice property. So we say an LT property over P over AP is a liveness property if every finite word in this liveness properties can be extended to a trace. So in words, so a trace in that property, right? So this is kind of the opposite of that. So if I have, in this case, so if I have some finite word, right? So the finite prefixes don't matter. That's what I'm trying to say. So if I have any finite word, then I can extend it, and I just care about the infinite behavior. So I just care about the extension. The property is just capturing the extension. And so any finite word I can extend into something that's in this property P. That's the definition. So this is kind of the tension between the two, like I was saying. So the safety properties kind of constrain the finite behavior. They're saying there's no bad prefixes that don't tell us what can happen. And the liveness properties are the opposite. They're telling us what's going to happen in the infinite part of the behavior. So why do we choose this definition? Because there's a nice characterization of linear time properties that falls out of this. That's this theorem. So if you have a linear time property P, then there's a liveness property P live and a safety property P safe over AP that lets us decompose P as the intersection of the two. So P is the intersection of P live and P safe.
So
yeah.
So you're saying characterization, do you mean that if I have a property that's live and safe, then it's expressible by some formula? Or? I mean, it's just an invariant.
I'm not saying.
It's a characterization that's usually.
Well, so. Okay, yeah. So first, I'll add it. Those are two questions, so I'll answer them in order. First, I'm not saying anything about formulas. I'm just saying something about the sets, right? Of the traces.
But then that subset characterizes linear time properties too, right?
What?
Every subset of the power set AP to the n is a linear time property.
Every subset, yeah, that's the definition of it.
That's a characterization.
Yeah, so that's the second question. So the second question, why is this a characterization? there's some way in which this decomposition can be made unique. But yeah, maybe we don't call it characterization. There's a nice property of linear time properties that tells us we can decompose them into a liveness property and a safety property. And intuitively, it's saying, well, we can take the finite behavior on one side and characterize the finite behavior on the other one side and characterize the infinite behavior on the other side, and decompose it that way. And that's where I'm going to leave it for today. And tomorrow we can look at some examples, and maybe we'll look at the model checker and how we can check these properties in practice. Thanks.
Eventually something. So
Yeah,
speed-
so the slides until, I'll repeat the question, the slides,
I don't think
the question is, are these slides somewhere? The slides for the first lecture are on Zulip. I'm gonna send the slides for today's lectures, also on Zulip today, but because as you see, there's typos, I wanna fix those typos. But once I fix the typos, I'm gonna send the full.
Yeah, the slides should be on the website at some point the next couple of days, or definitely by next week.
I don't, to eventually